Kimbal Musk is for sure in a vortex of change. In addition to being on the boards of Tesla and SpaceX, he's founder and lead of a nonprofit called the Kitchen Community, you'll hear something about. And in addition to the Kitchen Community, which I know something myself, I've actually set up one of these gardens, community gardens, at Sarah Elizabeth Ippel's school on the south side of Chicago, the Academy of Global Citizenship. Is Sarah Elizabeth here now? She was with us yesterday. There she is in the back. Hi, Sarah Elizabeth. It was a great experience. It was an inspiring experience, and you know the thing works. And so with that, Kimbal Musk.
Hey guys. I love this topic, change at scale. I sometimes think that I'm the Forrest Gump of change at scale. I grew up in South Africa during the fall of apartheid, change at scale. I was in California during the rise of the internet, change at scale. I was in New York for 9/11, change at scale. And I've been involved in businesses that really have this incredible impact on society as a whole, from the early days when we were changing the way people found their way around their cities through maps and door-to-door directions, to PayPal, to SpaceX and Tesla now, and Chipotle as well. I'm on the board of Chipotle and watching them change supply chain at scale, which is just an incredibly important part of what we need to do. So I watched all of this, and I was there for it, whether it was working with my brother or working with Steve at Chipotle or working with one person after the other. And I just had to decide, well, okay, now I've got to figure out what I'm going to do. And when you're surrounded by all that change at scale, that sort of shit really fucks you up. So, so it's about 10 years ago, I actually said, you know what, I can't and I don't want to compete with the experiences that I have. I wanted to create something that was more special to me, that wasn't about scale. And I created a restaurant called The Kitchen in Colorado. I actually moved there after 9/11, I think subconsciously, to get the hell away from anywhere that the terrorists could blow up my building. I was a few blocks away from the World Trade Centers when they got hit. And opened this restaurant, and it was a great success. And we did something that was a very, very good thing for the community. We called it a community bistro, and we worked with local farmers. We gave back to the local schools, and we just created a very positive addition to the community, and with absolutely no scale. And it was awesome. And I did that for a few years. And then I got bored because it didn't scale, and went back into technology, got very involved in the companies that I was working with at the time, and it was good, but it wasn't great. I loved food, and I really felt like there's something missing in our society when we think of food as fuel, and whether that's fast food or processed foods or just eating at your desk, that just didn't sit well with me, and I didn't quite know how to do something that mattered at scale. And then I had an unfortunate and very fortunate incident. About 4 years ago, I was going down a ski hill and went on an inner tube, 35 miles an hour. It's really not a very smart thing to do. And the tube flipped, and I landed on my head. I broke my neck. I was paralyzed on my left, horizontal for 2 months. And so when I was in the hospital, I decided that scale does matter. It really does matter. And what I had been doing on the food side needed to scale. And what we were doing for the communities needed to scale. And at the time, what we were doing with our restaurants was one restaurant, or two restaurants at the time, but really small. And we were working with schools and building these school gardens that were incredibly effective for kids. Doubling their intake of fruits and vegetables, obviously increasing their perspective on food for the rest of their lives. And when you teach science in those learning gardens, you increase test scores by 15 points on a 100-point scale. But what we've been doing for 7 years, working very hard, we've been able to do 2 per year in schools in our community, So by that time, I think it was 7 years in, we had maybe 16 school gardens. Totally didn't scale. So you had this wonderful thing that was just looked beautiful, is beautiful, does amazing things. No one cares because you just can't get it to scale. And what I did when I hurt myself, and I said, okay, I've got time now to just think. I resigned from every single thing that I could at the time, and I kept my board positions, but just any operational activities. Just wanted to focus on creating community through food at scale. And so the restaurants, I've done a few things there. We've figured out a way to grow those and create a lower price point to reach a larger community, and that's great. On the nonprofit side, I'd never done a nonprofit before, and I had no idea how to do it. I didn't think it would be that hard, but it's quite different. I think in many ways it's much harder than a for-profit, and it has its issues and has its benefits. And the reason why we did it was because of the benefits of a nonprofit when you want to reach kids in schools is super high. So if you want to scale in the education world, nonprofits, you scale very quickly. You don't have the red tape of a for-profit business. So decided that I needed to do this as a nonprofit. And so what we did was, about 4 years ago, while I was working, and my partners in my restaurant business are phenomenal designers, we created a product called the Learning Garden. And I want to take you through what we did. So the kitchen community creates these learning gardens around the country, focused on Chicago, LA, and Denver. And the goal with these learning gardens is to change the general trend of childhood obesity, which is awful and rising, and improve test scores, particularly in science. So for me to combine food and science in one place was a godsend. We started it about 4 years ago based on our restaurant at the kitchen in Colorado. And it was a wonderful thing to do in the early days. Now it's a bigger business than the restaurants. So what we did was we'd been working in these school gardens, and the school gardens were put in the corner of the schoolyard. They were, as I'm sure you guys have all experienced, we had a fence around them. They were kind of hard to teach in because teachers would bring kids in. They would need help. The gardens would be at grade, and they would damage the gardens. And it would be very hard, if you think about scale, you have to get every teacher to teach in these learning gardens. It's very hard to do that if you have to hold their hands every time. So you can't create something that is a difficult place to teach in. And so the other thing we found is that these school gardens, by putting them far away and putting a fence around them, you're essentially saying to kids, stay out of these school gardens. And then the other side of it, because they were put away and they were to the side, and most of the investment was actually in the fence, not in the garden itself, they were really not very pretty, and they would fall to pieces after a few years, and they became a negative aesthetic part of the school instead of a positive one. So we wanted to change that around, and so what we created was a product called the Learning Garden. This is an outdoor learning environment. It's a playful area. This is a middle school in South LA. 600 kids spend their recess in and around this learning garden. It is an incredibly pleasant and happy place to spend your recess. Whether they even eat the vegetables, whether they learn a lesson, we now reach 600 kids in that school every single day. This is a school in South Chicago. This is Miles Davis Elementary. As you guys might be aware, the recess didn't actually exist in CPS until a couple of years ago, or until a year ago. So they didn't have playgrounds. So this has become, for many, many schools in Chicago, their playground. And then the other side was it needed to be a very attractive place for teachers to teach. And attractive in the sense that we don't have to tell them what to do. We don't have to give them a lesson. We don't have to train them on anything. It's just a beautiful day outside. Go spend some time in the garden and read them a book. At every level, from kindergarten through 12, we wanted this to be a place where the teachers would find time to spend in the learning garden just because it is a great place to spend your time. And by doing that, we reach, in Chicago alone, actually reach about 800 teachers, 60,000 kids every school day that there is decent weather, and many times we actually do it inside the class itself. So the critical thing about what we do is that it works in every single schoolyard in the world. So if you want to scale, you cannot have individual solutions for each school. So we created a modular system. If you look at it without soil in it, these are basically like Lego blocks. They're FDA approved, so they go on top of toxic soil, which is a very serious problem. They'll go on rooftops, they'll go on concrete, they'll go on asphalt, they'll go on regular grass, they'll go on soil. They go anywhere the kids will spend their time. So putting it in a place where kids will not spend their time, also you don't get scale, because scale is a combination of how many schools you could be in and how many kids you can reach when you're in those schools. And so what we want to do is create something that the kids, every single child in that school would experience every single day that they come to that school, winter, summer, spring, fall, whenever. And by creating a very flexible environment, we're able to put it into any school at all. In Chicago, specifically, because it's such an urban environment, we have schools that actually put the learning garden in the entrance to the school. So there is no playgrounds, there's no land, we don't like rooftops. We do rooftops. We find that keeps it away from the kids. And we have very strict controls over where, if they don't put it in a place we agree, we just don't give it to them. Even if in our case the mayor helped us fund these, but that's how, honestly, was our biggest argument with the mayor's staff, was the location is so critical to the success of the learning garden that sometimes we would simply decline a school because they would put it in a place that just didn't feel right, or didn't feel like it was going to reach their kids every day. But by having that flexibility, we put them in the entrance to these schools. Kids will come in and out every day. We'll put it right next to the playground, so they'll play with their swing sets, they'll play with their slides, and right next to it is the learning garden. And when you go to high school, in their recess area, where they spend their time in recess, that is where the learning garden goes. Whatever it takes, we are there to get this as a part of an ambient part of their community in their schools. And this has been an incredibly powerful part of our ability to scale. The way it works in the schools is your customer is actually facilities, not the teachers, not the kids, not the parents. And facilities controls the maintenance and the grounds and the investment in that in the school itself. And a simple thing like integrated irrigation makes them love us, because even if we donate it to the school, the facilities department has to look after it. It becomes their property and becomes their thing to maintain. And by creating something like this, the simplest little innovation you could ever imagine, we plug it in to the irrigation system of the existing school. It waters itself throughout the summer. It waters itself as the rest of the school gets watered. And the actual facilities guys look at us now, instead of we're another garden, they look at us and go, this is the garden we want, because we know schools are going to do it. We want this one. And it's been a phenomenal boon for us. We get a lot of funding from the city of Chicago for that purpose. We get a lot of funding from Denver and LA, where we work. The systems are obviously designed by our team, but what's so cool about it is the entire system, which is about 2,000 square feet, is built in, at most, 2 days. So we built, with the mayor's help, last year, 100 learning gardens in the city of Chicago. We are in 100 schools. It is an unheard of thing to get into 100 schools ever. It's super unheard of to do it in 1 year. And one of the greatest reasons we were able to do that throughout the winter, throughout the summer, is that when we come in, we have a system, general construction, gets done in a few hours. The next morning, kids come and build a learning garden, and they're done by lunch. And what we do is they move the soil, sometimes 30 tons of soil. We actually calculate the number of kids in the school, and we know how far away to put the pile of soil. Because if the soil is too close and the kids are done before some of the other kids get a chance to put the garden together, they're pissed. And it's so awesome. So the whole thing gets done very, very quickly. And this ability to scale, this ability to do it so quickly, has enabled us to reach kids in Chicago very fast, get to our critical mass for us is 100 schools. And we got to 100 very quickly in Chicago. We're working now to do that in Denver and LA. And this comes back to the question of okay, well, how do you reach every single school in the country? So I looked at it and said, well, we were in Denver, we're doing good things. Yeah, but people think about Denver as a healthy town. It's frankly mostly white, but there's a lot of Hispanics. It's just a different culture. You look at Chicago, it did never work in Chicago. Okay, that's where we have to go. We have to go do it there. And so we did 100 in Chicago first, and we did it in the weather system that you guys have, which is pretty rough. You have the demographics are intense, from very low poverty, strong African American community, but generally low poverty and local violence. Very, very difficult city to work in. Politically, very different to Denver. Denver being a young city, pretty easy to manage. Chicago being politically quite challenging to manage. And if you think about it, Chicago represents a lot more cities. Maybe it's a little more extreme, but a lot more cities than Denver does. So Chicago represents Atlanta. It represents Philadelphia. It represents maybe a little bit of New York. Represents Boston. Represents Detroit. Represents Indianapolis. Represents where most of the people in our country live. And then with that, so it was critical for us, if you think about scale, for us to go in and be successful in Chicago. Denver represents a whole bunch of other cities, sort of the up-and-coming cities, the Seattles, the Portlands, the Austins, those kind of cities that also have a different model than the Philadelphias and the Chicagos. And then you've got California. And LA for us was the city to go in and say, we need to do the same thing that we're doing in Chicago in LA. You have 4 seasons. Politically, it's a weird system. Everything's super bureaucratic, super slow, but there's a lot of money there. So you can use it in different ways compared to Chicago, where things move very fast, but the money system is really tied up. And so by creating a system in LA, 100 schools in LA, 100 in Denver, and 100 in Chicago, we now have a system at scale in 3 very different communities. And now we can start doing the programming that works at scale. So when you do 1 school, you have a system. When you do 100 schools, you have to have a totally different system. So working on it really hard to do 1 school, and I remember having this argument so many times with people, is go do 1 school, make sure it works, and then go do the rest, is no point in doing 1 school. You've got to do 100 schools, create the system that works for 100 schools, and then you have a system that you can scale. And taking that approach, we were able to succeed. We got 100 done in Chicago last year. And now we're building that system that will train the teachers and build the program. In 2012, which was our first year, we built 50. We built 166 last year. I think we're at 117 now. This year we slowed down a bit to focus on the programming side. But appreciate that number, because in 40 years, the next best player has done 6. Because they're actually really hard, not only to create, but to maintain and to build and grow. And so the idea of this scale is what got me excited and got me into spending my energy on it. We obviously work very closely with our politicians. This is John Hickenlooper. I think he's one of your speakers soon. He's awesome. Mayor Emanuel, even more awesome. So the mayor came to us and said, love what you're doing in Colorado. We'd like you to do it in Chicago. We were obviously interested in doing Chicago. And together we raised 3. He gave us $1 million, and it was a great success in Chicago. Our system is very flexible. Obviously, any school could have it from a practical and physical perspective, but also from a funding perspective. So if you're a private school, we have many private schools, you pay full price. We'll provide a fee for service. We'll build it for you. We'll do whatever you want. Planting day, community day, the whole thing, and you pay for it. And the Learning Gardens cost about $35,000 per Learning Garden, but if they want us to provide a volunteer day for them, that's a value we provide. So we charge an extra $10,000, and we do that quite often, and that's quite successful. We also are extremely rigorous in how we choose our schools. We want to strongly bias these schools for the successful Learning Gardens. The history of our industry is that these gardens fail. And so we needed to do everything we could to bias it towards success. And that includes parents, interviewing teachers, interviewing principals, making sure that our product, which is not just the install, but the lifetime use of that Learning Garden, the experience of the teachers and the kids, is a good one. And that comes with making sure you have a good foundation from the beginning. As I mentioned, it's about $35,000 per school. Different cities, funded in different ways, but In LA, we get about a $25,000 fund per school from the district, so we have to raise a little bit more. In places like Chicago, we raise the full 35. In places like Denver, it's a little cheaper. But every single system is a little different, and that's why we enjoy working in the 3 different cities and trying to understand how it works. But with 35,000, that's about like $50 a student. If you think about it, a loss over minimum 10 years, but it's probably also a lot longer than that. It's $5 a student per year amortized over the, I mean, it's really free. And so we really work very hard to create something that is, it's really not a meaningful number. It's a very small number, and you can change the lives of these kids for the rest of their lives. Our education and outreach is cool. That's kind of what I was talking about with creating that 100 school system. We focus on science. So science specifically is where we see the most improvement in test scores. We also believe that that is the way to create a strong community, is to prepare our kids for science. So it works very well with our learning gardens. I'm personally passionate about science. I think we're going to do 300,000 hours of science instruction in Chicago this year, or in or around the learning garden. So it's going to be awesome. So then we're like, okay, now what do we do? So we've got 100 learning gardens in Chicago. What do we do now? Well, there's only one leg of the stool. There's school food. There's what do the parents understand? What do the teachers understand? We work on many of those things. And so this little pilot we're doing in Chicago is going very well, is teaching people how to roast a chicken with free billboards. So this is a billboard donated to us. It costs us, I think, $30 for the printing of it. And that's, by the way, who knows how to roast a chicken? Everyone's hand should be up because there's a billboard right there. That's how you roast a chicken. It's super, super easy. All right, and so we just started to do these sort of billboards. We do them for carrots. How do you roast carrots? Same recipe. How do you roast? I mean, it's so easy, so easy. And so we're working very hard to add that to our Chicago activities and getting parents cooking at home. And we have some fun things that we're going to continue to work on. But our goal is to really figure out a way to implement at scale in a city like Chicago, city like LA, city like Denver, where we could take that model and then just transplant it. So if you think about 100 schools or 100 communities, that's about the size of a decent-sized district. So you could go into Philadelphia, you can go into Boston, you can go into any of these places, and you'd have a system. Maybe they have 80 schools or 150, but it's all around the same problem. You don't have to create a different system when you're that big. And then you start working with outdoor billboard companies, and they have to provide this stuff for free. Talk about scale. We can put this all over the country if we chose to. Tomorrow, it wouldn't cost us a cent because it's free. And they have access to these billboards all over the country. They have to provide public service announcements, and it's awesome. So an example of some of the stuff we're doing on the scale side. And then our impact is awesome. We increase the likability of, this is the studies we've done, increase the likability of the vegetables they grow by 50%. So if you grow carrots, you're more likely, 50% more likely to eat carrots when they're served to you. If you don't grow carrots, it is zero change. So it's not like they generally like vegetables more. It's exactly what they grow is what they want to eat. And that's really powerful for us to play with. And then we've seen an increase in actual home gardens where parents will start increasing their the growing at home. It's very easy to grow at home. People don't know that because they've just completely lost it in their culture. And so we're helping them learn that actually it's super easy. Go get a bucket and you can grow tomatoes. I mean, it's really, really, really easy. And generally, we've seen not just from a science and food consumption perspective, but overall, when you put these learning gardens in, you add the aesthetic value and you get kids hanging out in a more cooperative, non-aggressive way, it just changes their actual social thinking, which we believe is a great side benefit as well to what we're doing. And that is it. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Kimbal. So I always learn things from our speakers. This time I learned how to roast a chicken. But obviously, much more than that. First of all, thank you to Kelly Kwan Bianucci and all of our friends at the Colorado Innovation Network, our sister organization in Colorado, who helped us invite Kimbal. You mentioned John Hickenlooper. He was a keynoter for us a couple years ago, inspired all of us. He is one of the Kin Challengers. What we did this year is we took 3 of our keynoters, Governor Hickenlooper, Ann Hand from Project Frog, whom you just met, and Esther Dyson, whom you'll meet tomorrow morning if you're with us for Kin. She couldn't be here today. And they posed a challenge to our Kellogg students. We, through a competitive process, selected 3 teams and gave them this challenge to work with John Hickenlooper, to work with Ann Hand, to work with Esther Dyson on some aspect of scaling. It's been great for the students and hopefully will add some value for our keynoters. A few other things I learned here. Scale does matter. There is sort of almost a responsibility sometime when you have something that works to figure out how to make the world better. And all of our speakers have spoken in some way about changing paradigms. Here's an interesting one for you. Kimbal basically said, school gardens failed. Let's create some school gardens. Think about the wisdom of that. When was the last time you went to the office and said, hey, I have a new idea, and your colleague said, this is my favorite one, we tried that before, it didn't work. I love that. We can feel it when you hear it. We tried that, but they always say it the same way. We tried that before and it didn't work. Like, so there. The thing is, maybe the world has changed in the past 6 years. In 1993, the Apple Newton came out. Dismal failure. In 1998, the Palm Pilot, grand success. Category-creating product. What changed in 6 years? Had nothing to do with the product. Certainly there were differences in the product that made the Palm Pilot succeed where the Newton failed. Lots of differences. But ignore all of those. There was an exogenous factor, a factor having to do with consumer behaviors that fundamentally changed between 1993 and 1998, and that was the mobile phone. In 1993, if you had a mobile phone, it was called a car phone, and it had a wire on it. And by the way, if you had one, you would drive up to the stop sign and pick the phone up, even if you weren't on the phone, and go like this, so everyone could see you had a phone. By 1998, everyone in your core market already had a phone, which meant that for the first time in history, human beings had the experience of carrying around a small electronic device. So by the time the Palm Pilot was launched, the world really had changed. Now, obviously, more is going on with Kitchen Community than the world changing. They're changing the paradigms. Find the place that will never work and go try and make it work there. That's a heck of an exercise. It's a little harder, but might work better in the long run. I also was struck by the synchronicity between Ann and Kimbal's presentations. You mentioned, Ann, that if you increase the light, grades go up by 15%? 20%. Wow, do I hear 25? 20%. And you mentioned if kids are fed better, grades go up by 15%. So we've got a whole country of A students now. All we need is light and food. But there are data behind this. And how do we make that happen? Last point about this, Kimbal, I've had 3 people, and they weren't supposed to be talking, by the way, Brian. I've had 3 people come up to me and say, man, I want one of those for my house. Now, I suspect you're already talking about this. But imagine if you could sell self-irrigating, beautiful modular gardens to human beings who buy them, and then the money that they use provides revenue to support your nonprofit. Isn't that beautiful? We're proud to have Kitchen Community here in Chicago, Kimbal, and thank you for being with us.